Hey, thanks for joining us. This podcast was recorded live at a Table by Salt event. Table is a global Christian audio community talking about real issues and engaging in meaningful conversations. Come be encouraged and entertained as we join together as the body of Christ. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this recording are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of Salt. Check out table.b-salt.com for all our live events and schedule of what's coming up. Come and share your voice or simply listen, get connected, and be encouraged as you go about your day.
Hi, Denise. Hi, John.
Hi, guys. We got Alex in the house. How we doing? Oh, just kidding. What's up, Jermaine? How we doing, fam? Jacob. What's good, everybody? Let's go.
Don't be afraid to put in the chat where you're from.
What's up, people?
Hey, we've got a responsive elk. Amazing.
What's up,
I love when
Tia?
it names random things. It's so fun.
Francesca. Yeah, where are you guys from? This is so fun because it's like a worldwide event. Okay, Pacific Northwest. Very cool. Jermaine, where are you from, my man? We are in Southern California.
SoCal, Manchester.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's me. Great place to be.
Okay.
So awesome.
Staffordshire.
Very cool.
Amazing, Tia.
Oh.
Hey, Francesca.
We got the UK repping today. I love it.
Hey, Francesca. Nice to have you here again.
What's up, Marvin, Mayo, Gary? How we doing, fam?
Great. Really exciting to see all these faces. Some of them I recognise from other events.
Gary from Northern Ireland. So cool.
I love it. I hope you asked a question so we can hear that beautiful Irish accent.
John from New Jersey.
Hey.
Okay. So fun.
Hey,
y'all.
Isaac. Hey, Drew, welcome. We've got Kait and JJ here from Heart of Dating, and we're talking about sex as a single person. So something that's maybe not often discussed in kind of very candid ways, but we're excited to be kind of tackling this topic tonight. So I'll just give another minute or so while people start to come in. My name's Sarah, and I work for SALT as Operations Director, and I'm based up in the northwest of England and the UK, but really excited to have Kait and JJ here.
Oh, we got some of our people from our London meetup that we did this summer. Hey,
I know.
Mayo.
Oh, ace.
Yeah.
Fun.
We can't wait to come back again. So, okay, we got the room filling out. Everyone, we would love to see where you're from as we go throughout today. Obviously, if you see someone local or long distance that you're interested in, you guys know what to
Hey.
do. Yeah.
Hey, I like it.
We don't have to tell singles what to do, okay?
Oh, the American in Paris. Oh.
Oh, hi, Nikki. It's so good to see you. Okay, fam. Well, we got Finland in the house, Houston in the house. We got all over. These are some of my favorite events to do. It's just like
Canada.
worldwide
Let's
singles uniting. So
Nisa, I actually was pretty much like Connecticut is where I was based for most of my life. A lot of people don't know that. So cool.
Ah.
Aloha from Hawaii. See, look, we got Hawaii all the way to the UK, Holland. So cool.
oh, it's so cool.
Vancouver Island. Oh my goodness. Look at that.
Got the Netherlands in the house. I love it. It's literally my favorite.
So cool. All right, guys. Well, we're going to start diving on in. Please feel free to use the chat as much as you would like. Obviously, we're going to be diving into a very hot topic that I'm sure you guys are anxious to hear a little bit about. And, you know, unlike some times when you go to church and your pastor has a conversation, they're like, we're going to talk about sex. All singles leave the room. We're not doing that today. Okay. Of course, we're not going to be talking explicit things, but we're going to be really teaching from a place of the things that we did before we got married. And P.S. we've only been married a year. So we're not necessarily experts in the sex department per se, but we did really prepare to have a healthy sexual ethic and a healthy sexual relationship in our marriage. And we want to share some of those things with you today. Just really quick before we dive into that, we're going to tell you guys a little bit about who we are, and then we're going to get into it. So I'm Kate.
And I'm JJ.
And we run The Heart of Dating, which is started as a podcast about 6 years ago, and it's still going. Every Wednesday and Friday, we have new episodes. We've covered probably almost any question that you have in dating. We've probably covered it over the last 6 years. And from the podcast, which has expanded and expanded, we have been able to grow our ministry to be more. We now do events around the world. We actually did an event in Norway this summer. We host a yearly conference. This year it's going to be in Nashville, December 29th and 30th. A few years ago, I had the honor to write a book about rejection, which I wrote in my singleness and had a lot to do with my story of rejection and healing rejection. And we run some awesome dating programs, specifically one called the School of Dating, which is a 8-week mentorship program. So we just love serving singles. And though we are married, we have been single way longer than we have been married. I was single for 18 years before I got married just this last year. And JJ was single for not quite as long as time because he is younger than me. But he's also been single for quite many years. So we're not those people that are like, oh my gosh, we've been married since we were 22 and we're going to preach to you about singleness and sex. No, like literally we have been way more ghosted and online dating and doing all those things than we have ever been in a marriage and having sex. Okay. So let me just put that out there. All right. So we are going to talk about sex, baby. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So we're talking about sex for singles, and we are here to answer any questions you have as well at the end of today. So if you have them, put them in the chat. If you really have a burning question, you might be able to ask it like live. No question is pretty much off limits. Okay. Which really opens up a lot of different things. So keep those questions. So we're going to give you 3 different ways to prepare for a healthy sexual experience in marriage, and also how to steward your sexuality now in your singleness. The first thing that we want to talk about is really just healing from any sexual past that you might have, whether you have an extensive sexual past, which is part of my history, or whether you don't necessarily have an extensive physical sexual past, but you have some distorted views of sex and sexuality based on your upbringing. So, like I said, I have a past, okay? And I also have a really bad experience from my past with purity culture teaching. I did grow up in the 90s, and I did experience, in high school, I got a boyfriend, and the leaders of my youth group found out, and they were like, oh my goodness, you're not allowed to date unless you're dating for marriage. Like, why are you guys dating? Like, you can't be doing this. And we were like, we didn't know that. Okay, great. So basically, this leader of this group pulled us into his office and gave us a list of rules that we had to follow. 2 pillows between you at all time. Your faces have to be at least a foot apart at all times. You can only hang out in groups, never use blankets, this, that, and the other. Okay, I'm telling you, this is real. Then we had to sign it. And in signing that contract, we also had to agree to go to marriage counseling. We were 16 years old in high school. Okay. So I just want to let y'all know I grew up in that purity culture. So if you did as well, I want to see that in the chat. I can relate to you. And while purity culture did a lot of things, unfortunately, wrong, I don't believe it had necessarily bad intentions. It hurt a lot of people, but I don't believe the intentions were to hurt people. Okay, another part of my past is, though I grew up with all those purity culture teachings, I had so many issues in my life and the way I saw myself, specifically relationship with men in my life and my father, that I ended up turning to sex as a means to fill my value and my worth. And I used sexual things to connect with men to fill a void inside of me of wanting to be loved. And eventually this led me to being sexually abused in my life. So there were a lot of there's a lot of sexual healing that I needed to do in my life, a lot of sexual shame that I had throughout my life. And when I finally faced it in my mid-20s, I really had to unroot all the things I had learned about sex, the connections I had made between sex and intimacy, and relearn what healthy intimacy was. And within all that, I also had to learn, what does God say about sex really? And I had to connect to my why, not the why that I got from my youth group, but what do I really believe about sex in tandem with God? And what does God's word say? And how do I not should on myself? Kate, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, but instead rebuild my why that is connected to the heart of God. And that is such an important part of this process of healing from your sexual past, is redeveloping a healthy sexual ethic. Okay. And then from there, I was able to set boundaries. And my boundaries, because of my sexual past, were very strict. Maybe they were way stricter than some of my friends, because I had to personally set up more strict safeguards, because I knew myself. I knew my past. I knew my history. And so, yeah, I wasn't making out with guys. I was trying not to make out with guys. I was not trying to have guys over at 11 o'clock at night, even though I was 30 years old. And, oh, I'm old enough now, I should know better. No, I knew my history, and I had to set stricter boundaries. So that's a bit of my story.
I love it. And I hope some of you guys really relate with that story. My story is a little different, which I love, because it kind of allows Kate to connect with a group of people, and then I connect with a totally separate group of people, because my sexual past was somewhat external, but it was extremely internal, in the sense of, like, externally with like other girls and sexual partners and dating, I had actually a very small physical history. I was very transparent with Kate when we were dating that I had made out with multiple women, but really that was kind of the extent, except for I had done oral sex once. So as far as like an external record and record keeping, it wasn't very extensive. Now internally and between myself and my challenges, I actually had a huge problem with porn and masturbation from about 14 to 24 years old. So what's funny, especially in purity culture and the churches, there's so much emphasis put on your external history and your sexual partners, when in reality, I had so much sin and challenges and shame, and mine was more just internal, with me and sexual objects and pornography. So even though, and I say this all the time, even though I was a virgin from like a penetrative, sexual standpoint, I absolutely had soul ties and connections with women all across, the internet and, in my past. So, even though you can check this box, and I don't know if I love being transparent about this, because I used to quietly check this box about, are they a virgin or not? And that was kind of like my barometer, my thermometer about my dating partner's like spiritual maturity. Like, hey, if they're a virgin, okay, check that box. They must love God. They must be smart. They must be wise. Maybe I could date her and maybe I can't. If she's not a virgin, whoa, 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 proceed with tons of caution. Like, let me really make sure that this girl is who she says he is. Like, she's kind of damaged goods. And as I kept dating and then pursuing God and growing my relationship, I was just so fundamentally wrecked in my heart and soul when I really learned that the Bible is filled with imperfect person after imperfect person after imperfect person, with full of imperfect past. I mean, we talk about the apostle of our faith, Paul, who was the greatest writer of the Bible, the greatest apostle of all, one of the most influential people in the kingdom of God to ever exist. And what was his past like? He was hunting down Christians, literally hunting down Christians. So if God can look at Paul and say, I don't care, I'm using you, and it's about who you are today, well, why can't I look at someone who could be my future wife and say, why is that not possible for me? And more importantly, it's not about her past, it's about who she is today, right? And more importantly, if I actually think about this, how could I not extend grace to her after everything I have received and the mercy and forgiveness of my sexual past that was way more hidden, way more extensive than anyone would ever see. How could I not extend that same grace that I've been extended for my past? Right. And more importantly, why is my sexual past less bad than hers just because it's maybe more internal? So there's all these questions that we have to ask ourselves when it comes to purity culture. The biggest mistake of purity culture was it elevated your sexual purity above everything. And the reality is that nothing is elevated before God except the fact that you're covered by the blood of Jesus. No behavior, no obedience, no self-righteousness could ever be elevated. And so that's the biggest mistake of purity culture is, hey, your sexual purity can elevate you to a more righteous and pure point before God. And that can be further from the truth.
Yeah, amen. So we wanted to spend a bit of time today just in that healing from your sexual past, because me and JJ do have quite different pasts. Me externally with hooking up and having sex with multiple different people from a very young age, unfortunately. And JJ not necessarily having that same sexual penetrative experience, but really idolizing and almost having a self-righteous view of himself in some ways because he was a virgin and put that on the pedestal, while behind closed doors, he still didn't have a healthy
Right.
sexual ethic. While behind closed doors, he's still struggling with pornography. And so, there's a lot of people that we've seen in our community that are like, well, I would never date a virgin, or I would never date someone who's not a virgin. And I think JJ and I's story together is a testimony of like, well, why? Like, how can you say that your story is more righteous than this other person's?
Right.
How are you to judge that person's past? Who are they today and who are they becoming? That's the more important
Exactly.
question.
And then both looking at each other and saying, you know what? Both of us have fallen short. Both of us have messed up. Both of us are, quote, damaged goods. And both of us are redeemed by one thing, Jesus.
Yeah,
Nothing
amen.
that we've done or anything. So
That's where we wanted to start, and we could go there for like the next hour with y'all, but we're going to transition into the second biggest thing in preparing for sex for a single, which is really deep-rooting some sex myths that we believe about sex that we've maybe believed because of culture, maybe we believe because of our community or what our parents have told us, or even what we've experienced in our church community. Okay, so we want to highlight just a few of the biggest sex myths out there and replace them with a theology of sex as much as we can. We'll probably get to more of that in the Q&A, and then lastly, we're going to go over how to steward your sexuality well in singleness. So here are some of the biggest sex myths out there that we just want to like really briefly debunk.
yeah. So number one, and there's a lot of these, right? We gather these from our house. We gather these from our church. We gather these from Disney, from porn, from wherever, okay, throughout our whole entire life. One of the biggest myths that we see is that if you wait to have sex, then guess what? Sex is going to be amazing. You better wait. You better reserve your purity. You better withhold sex, because if you don't, you're going to have an awful sex life. But if you hold it, if you're pure, if you're a virgin, you're going to have awesome, amazing, healthy sex. And this assumption is basically saying God's going to bless you if you wait and if you obey. And the reality is that that's completely untrue. God doesn't work in unspoken deals. He doesn't say, okay, if you do X, if you obey me, then I'm going to bless you with Y, right? And specifically with sex, this is so dangerous because the reality is that sex, especially in the beginning, should be relatively awkward. It can actually be painful. It can actually be maybe even uncomfortable. It can be frustrating. It can be, it can have tears. It can have shame popping up, and it has nothing to do with maybe your sexual past or how pure you were or how impure you were, right? The reality is that sex is a journey, and especially in the beginning, it's going to be the most awkward, strange, foreign because you're just starting. And that is a great thing. So this is a myth to say that sex is going to be amazing if you obey, if you remain pure, if you remain righteous, it's going to be amazing. It can be amazing for anyone and everyone who's been redeemed, but more importantly, it's a journey. So there's no guarantee from the very beginning it's going to be this hot, wild, amazing James Bond sex that you see in the movies. Okay, it's actually going to be the opposite, and that's a good thing.
Yes. And I think with that, it's coming back to your why should not be rooted in I'm doing this so that I can have an amazing sex life. The reality of why you should be waiting to have sex in marriage is to honor God. My goal is to honor God. My goal isn't to get something out of this. My goal is to just simply honor God because this is what God's will is for me. He wants me to wait. He has said that like sex is best in a covenant. And so your why has to be rooted to I'm doing this just to honor God, not to get something out of it.
Right.
The second myth is that women don't like to have sex and it's only to serve men. Now, I just want to say that we did an entire podcast series earlier this year, season 10 on our podcast, where we talked all about sex for about 13 different episodes. And we dove into a lot of things. And I just say, as a woman, the reality of the myth that women don't like sex is it's a real thing. There are a lot of narratives out there that say sex is really to please the man and that women, you're not really going to like it, but you need to do it because it's your duty. That is not true. God designed orgasmic features in both the male and the female, and he designed it to be pleasurable for both the male and the female. And anatomically, that is how he designed it. Women, if you are programmed to think that you are not going to like sex, that is something that I would love for you to start healing before you ever enter into a marriage. Because if you have the mindset, women don't like sex, I'm not going to like it, then you're probably not going to like it, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'm sorry if that's been spoken over to you, or if I'm sorry if you've heard that from married women. Any married women that are saying women don't like sex or I don't like sex, they are not in a healthy sexual relationship. Okay. They do not have a healthy relationship to sex. And that is not something you should even be listening to. As a married woman, just a year in, okay, I can honestly tell you, women, you can like sex, you can love sex, and that is an absolute myth. But I want JJ to answer number 3, the third myth we want to cover, which is that, sometimes men feel like women should be on call for sex.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of household you guys grew up in. I don't know what kind of church you grew up in. I will say from a traditional evangelical Christian household that I grew up in, the Bible Belt of the United States, which is the South, there was definitely this unwritten expectation and rule that, hey, men have a much higher sex drive. They have a huge sexual need. And the reality is that women, hey, you got to put out whenever he says, I need this, right? It might be to help him cope with masturbation. It might be to help him cope with his sexual urges and his needs. And hey, he's the man of this house. Like, if he wants sex, then guess what? He's going to get sex. The reality is that this couldn't be further from true biblical sex, which is incredibly mutual. Both parties are saying, yes, this is something that I want to have, versus a silent no. And what we see time and time after again, and story after story, is there was a partner in the relationship, in the marriage, who silently had a strong no, but did not feel like they could express that no, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is part of my duty as a wife. Now, the reality is that is very, very tough. Some people really hold on to this idea that, hey, you should not withhold sex. And that's for negotiation. Sex should not withhold for arguing and negotiations. It's not supposed to be something you use as a tool to get your partner to do something. That's manipulation. And it's saying, don't use sex as a manipulative tool. But the reality is that 1 Corinthians 7 is, hey, you don't own your body. And this is both ways, in the sense of a woman has a right to say no, and the man has a right to say no. And what people don't realize is the early church, do you guys understand? It was made up mostly of women because it was the first time in human history where women were respected as human beings and not property. Okay. This was revolutionary at the time. Paul is basically, for the first time in human history, saying, hey, women actually have a voice. Women are to be respected. And not only are they to be respected, but guess what, husbands? You have to lay down your life and respect them and love them as Christ did for the church.
Yes.
Okay. So this was totally crazy for its time. and somewhat normal for us now. But this is the reality of sex, is that it is incredibly mutual. And my question for men and women is this: why would you guys not want your sex life to be incredibly mutual?
Mm.
As a man, as a woman, don't you want a partner who wants to say yes to sex? And if they have a no, why would you ever want to have sex in that sense?
Yep.
Right?
100%. There's also going to be seasons if you are pregnant and you give birth that like you can't have sex physically after that. And you like, there's just so many elements to this. Gosh, we can go on and on, but I'm sure we'll have questions about that. The fourth myth is that sex is easy and frequent. And, this is something that is really driven by Hollywood. You see these Hollywood films, which I laugh at seeing this now, especially, but you see like films in Hollywood all the time. And I'm sure you guys have seen them throughout the years where it's like all of a sudden they are in throes with the passion of one another and the chemistry comes over them. And it's just like, we're going to have sex right here, right now, wherever it is. And then they're laying in bed together after, and they're just like, they fall immediately asleep and everything is so peaceful and wonderful. And that view is not accurate. Okay. That is not how it happens. And that is a bad narrative that we see over and over in Hollywood about how sex is portrayed. It's this idea that sex is like ultra fiery. It's going to be easy. It's going to be frequent. It's going to be just like this perfect picturesque thing. And then you lay in each other's arms in bed afterwards. And that's not necessarily how it is. Sex takes a lot of work to figure out what you like, what your partner likes, when you feel most sexually aroused, when your partner feels most sexually aroused, what time of day is a good time of day for you guys. Like there are so many different things that go into having a healthy sex life, and it depends on each partner. It's like an equation. You have to figure out one another and figure out what's best for one another. So sex can be amazing. It can absolutely be amazing in the context of marriage, but is sex easy and always so frequent and having it 3 times a day is the goal? No, that is not necessarily the goal. The goal is to be emotionally, spiritually, and yes, physically connected. And in that, you're going to have the best sexual intimacy.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Great job.
So we want to cover one more thing and then we're going to open it up to questions, which is stewarding your sexuality well in singleness.
Exactly. And we love this. And this is actually where it gets the most practical and helpful for singles. Number one, just know you don't control the thoughts that come into your mind. If you view it like this, I have an airport, there's planes all swirling around and around. You don't have control over the airplanes that are flying overhead. A lot of people like to use the image of a nest and birds. There's a lot of birds flying, and you don't control the birds, okay? The birds are always flying, but you do give permission for what bird can land in your nest. You do give permission for what airplane can be landing in your airport, okay? So you can control what to do with your thought life. You can't necessarily control what thoughts come into your mind, okay? And when you feel that urge because of your hormones or urges, you need to feel the discomfort, okay? One key thing that is we love to say it's a longing, it's an urge, it's a desire. However, it's not a need, okay? It's not a need, and there is a big difference between the two. Needs don't pass over, okay? If you're hungry and thirsty, you're only going to get more hungry and thirsty, okay? But I'm so sorry, but if you're horny, right? If you are feeling that urge, that longing, it does pass.
Mm-hmm. So this is a really important thing because like seeing somebody and thinking, oh, they're beautiful, or oh my gosh, they're kind of sexy, isn't necessarily the bad thought. It's what you do after that point. Am I going to linger? Am I going to go down the rabbit hole? Am I going to think about this more? Is this going to drive me to look at pornography later? Like, but seeing a person and having the thought they're beautiful, they're sexy, or whatever the thought is not necessarily the thing that we need to put shame over. We don't need to put shame over any of this. If you have the thought, that's a natural thought. It's what you do with the thought after that. Do you linger in it? Do you run with it? Or do you redirect it? Okay. And here's the thing. We can feed the urge by thinking about it more. We have to be aware of what we're watching, what we're reading, what we're taking in, because those things all will feed those urges, right? So if you're constantly watching things that are showing you sexual things or reading things that are showing you sexual things, you are feeding that urge. So when a thought does come into your mind, it's going to be much harder to pivot out of that thought. You're going to start thinking of those images that you saw in that movie or from pornography, if you're looking at pornography. So, when you feel this need to, I have to have sex, or I have to masturbate, or I have to do something, it's not actually that you need sex. What you're actually looking for is intimacy. What you're actually looking for is intimacy. You're looking for something that's not just sexual. You're looking at the end of the day for intimacy. And oftentimes when you really are craving that thing, it can be because maybe you're lonely or you need some emotional connection.
Exactly. I mean, listen, if anyone here struggle with pornography, and this includes me for 10 years battling day in and day out, the reality is that why would I go to pornography, a sexual desire, a lusting longing, when I was bored, when I was frustrated, when I felt rejected, when I was trying to cope with emotional pain? Why would I go to a sexual act and fulfillment for an emotional pain and desire that I needed to satisfy? Right? It would be like saying, I'm emotionally devastated. I'm sad. I'm going to go to physical food to fulfill this desire, this frustration, this boredom, this sadness. Why would I go to ice cream? That's a physical solution, a physical feeding for an emotional desire. But do you see how they're linked? It's the same thing for sex. We go to sexual intimacy, pornography, for the fulfillment of an emotional need or desire.
So a big part of this too, if self-control is your only strategy against sexual temptation, that is either going to fail you or you're going to shut down your sexuality entirely, which we don't want you to do either. We're not asking you and we're not encouraging you to entirely shut down your sexuality, because your sexuality is a beautiful thing created by God. What we're saying is, how do you steward this well? How do you pivot it into things that are appropriate for the stage of life that you're in singleness? So we want to encourage you, when you have those moments of questioning, oh my gosh, like, or a thought comes into my mind, ask the Lord to begin showing you where you might need healing. Ask the Lord where you have needs maybe in your life that aren't being met, emotional needs, intimacy needs. Maybe you truly just are lonely and you need more intimate time with people in your life, and yet you're using sex or masturbation or pornography as a way to scratch that itch instead. And so we can invite the Lord into these desires. He's not ashamed or looking at you with shame because you have a sexual desire. He's just asking you to bring it to him and steward it in a healthy way.
Right.
Okay, guys, we can talk on and on and on, but we want to open up the floor to some questions because we know this is a spicy topic.
I know
y'all have lots of questions. So I think we have Devin up here who has a question. So Devin, is your mic working? There he is.
What's up, bro?
You guys hear me?
Yes,
I
sir.
don't know if I went to Bethel School of Supernatural Discipleship, and we had like an 18-week sex course, I guess. So I was just kind of hoping I can discuss or have a few conversations. I didn't really have a question, I guess. Dang. So you guys are just gonna give me one question?
Yeah,
if that works.
Yeah. If you don't have a question, that's okay. That's awesome that you're in that program. That's so cool.
I would say this though. I mean, oh man, there's so much I would like to talk about, because there's things like, I think this is a great topic, but the church doesn't talk about it enough, really, and the church needs to talk about it more instead of having like the world or pornography kind of dictate 100%. Sex, I guess. How can I say? What's my question? Well, I would say this. So, sex is a real thing, and married couples should have it. But I would say if anybody has struggled with pornography or sex, or yeah, obviously it should be cut off. But I would say this: that one thing that we learned is at Bible school, God's actually really loving and forgiving, and the church shouldn't be so hard on people that struggled with that stuff, and try to be more loving to them, and because God really has wide open arms for people to return back to him, I guess.
Yeah.
But I would say this: maybe if you guys would read and discuss Psalms 127 and 128.
Devin, I love your perspective, and 100%. It's like what we were saying earlier. Like, it's not about we need to stop shooting on each other. Like, oh, you're struggling with sexual sin. Oh, you shouldn't be, or you need to do this, that, and the other. It's more, okay, like, hey, first of all, there's grace. First of all, you need to know that even struggling with this means that you have a sexual desire, and that sexual desire is a good thing. We need to start there, period, end of sentence. And then after that, we can say, okay, if we're wanting to steward this in a healthy way, because that is God's request of us, let's figure out how to do that together. Instead of, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, follow these 5 rules to then stop, sexually sinning. And I think there's a lot more grace and a lot more compassion we need in that area. Okay, so I think we have Cole next up for a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. What's
Yeah.
up, Cole?
Hey, how's it going?
What's up?
You know, this topic always brings it's also really weird for me because I am still a virgin technically, but that's a conversation for another.
Right.
But anyway, one thing I grew up in South Louisiana, and I used to work in a restaurant. I'm not going to say the name of a restaurant, but it's a very popular sports bar restaurant.
Okay.
Anyway, one thing that I noticed there is I was a server there, and I was one of 2 or 3 male servers there. Not only that, I was only one of 2 people in the entire restaurant that was still a virgin.
Mhm.
And also, one thing I knew there is that every single girl waiter there was either 1, pregnant, 2, had kids already, 3, smoked weed, or 4, all the above, or 5 were college dropouts. And none of them were married.
Mm.
So it was one of those things. It's like it was really weird, and I was just surrounded by sexual figures my entire life, and got me to be very lonely and very, very awkward as well. One thing I can say though is that if you look at shows like Unexpected and 16 Pregnant and things like that, you guys know what Unexpected is, right? It's basically TLC's version of 16 and Pregnant.
Okay.
But anyway, the reason why I bring that up is because one thing, every single time I watch shows or people like that, the first thought that runs through my mind is, how can people be this freaking stupid? Like, how can people like this constantly make stupid decisions? And
Yeah, Cole, we'll go ahead and pause there.
yeah,
I think one thing to always keep in mind is, like, have you not made any poor decisions in your life? Like, have you never failed? And some people, there's this idea that we can judge people for the decisions that they've made. And I actually love what Devon just said, which is, hey, we have one rule, which is to approach everyone with empathy, compassion, mercy, and grace. Why? Because we have been afforded that same thing. And the reality, Cole, is that if you had access to my thoughts and what I've done in my heart and what I've done in the unspoken and the invisible, then you would not believe what you've seen or what I've said, especially in my heart or my mind. So I don't have a choice. When I go to someone, I don't care what they've done, who they've been, or who they are. I don't have a right to judge anyone, right? Because that is the same grace and mercy I've accepted from Jesus himself, which the reality is that, read the parable of the 2 debtors. The day you realize that you've not been forgiven for a little, but you've been forgiven of the whole entire world and universe of your shoulders of sin, listen, that mercy and grace is going to have such a newfound meaning that you would never have understood ever before. So the quicker you are to admit just how far you've been forgiven and what of, the more you can extend that grace and mercy to anyone, regardless of the decisions that they've made in their life.
And these situations should ultimately, if we are trying to model our life like Christ, they should bring us to weep. They should bring us to have, wow, I am so sad, and I have such compassion because this person is living in such probably a horrible hell, if you think about it. And I have such compassion for this person. I'm not here to judge them, but man, my heart hurts for probably what they believe, what they think about themselves, what's happened to them in the past that is causing them to make these decisions. My heart is so deeply saddened for them. And that, I think, is the posture we should take as believers. I'm not going to judge them, but I'm going to increase my compassion because I just cannot even begin to understand what has led them to these decisions in their life. And I'm sure that has been really hard and taxing on the back end. Okay, so I think we also have another question from Effie. Is it
Everyone?
Effie? Is that how you say your name? Okay, great. Hey, girl.
Yes. Hi, Kate. Hi, JD. Actually, Kate, just to say this, I've been following your podcast for about a little over 3 years now. So it's really nice to actually meet you virtually, of course.
Aww.
And I wanted to ask this question because, like, with regards to saving sex for marriage, I've noticed, and someone said this in the chat, that these days, sorry to single out the guys, but a lot of guys feel like Christian guys, this is like saving sex for marriage is a like suggestion or something that they don't really have to do. And like dating kind of makes it frustrating. And the last person that I did date, and maybe after like about a month and a half of dating, and we had this conversation, and he was like, yeah, of course, like I expect to have sex. And I was like, oh wow, I thought like we had the same views being Christian. And he was like, oh, I didn't know you practice traditional Christianity. And I was like, what even is that? But like, my question is, how and when do you like, how early should you bring up like the topic when seeing someone newly, if that makes sense?
This is a great question, Effie. You know, it's funny because we literally teach this program, School of Dating. We were just talking about boundaries last night in our program. So we got your answer right here, right now. Babe, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would just say, like, first of all, it needs to be talked about early. I love it when it comes up as well because it reveals where this person is spiritually, emotionally, as far as their boundaries and where they stand on it. So, and I actually saw a lot of comments from the women in the chat with a lot of discouragement saying, I'll talk to a guy for a week, 3 months, whatever it might be, and then all of a sudden he starts pressuring me for sex, or he's extremely disappointed when he finds out that I'm waiting. Guys, this is a great thing. This is awesome, wonderful news when someone reveals where they are spiritually and especially like physically and sexually, they are on a different page. This is a really, really awesome thing that this was brought up and we have a clear idea of where they stand because, hey, you just revealed to me that sex before marriage is on the table. You're totally cool with it. This is something that you want. I am not there anywhere at all or even close. This for me is super illuminating and clear that this is not a relationship I have any desire to pursue romantically. And that's a great thing that we can actually celebrate. Does that make sense?
To clarify, we shouldn't be necessarily telling them our whole sexual past on the first few dates. But I do think it's so important to get on the same page about own your boundaries and communicate that ASAP. When I was dating, I would communicate very early on. I do not kiss anybody until I'm in an exclusive dating relationship with that person. That is a very clear boundary for me. And I said that like literally on the first date, just because I was like, this guy, if he's going to try to kiss me at the end of the first date, second date, third date, like that might be awkward for him. And I just want to be clear with my boundaries up front. And then I was clear, like, as we progress, like there's no kissing at all for me for at least probably a few months as I first got to know a person. And then as we transitioned into a relationship, there was that conversation of, okay, we need to have our like the conversation of sexual ethic, like what is yours, what is mine, which usually came up a little bit earlier, but this needs to be discussed and you need to be on the same page as early as possible.
Right.
Great question, Effie, by the way. Thank you for that question. Okay, I think we were going to bring Jermaine up for a question. I think he's been waiting to ask his question. I'm going to bring him up. Okay, Jermaine, what's up? Can you hear us?
Hey, Jermaine, don't forget to unmute your microphone.
All right, we might have to move to Trudy. I'm so sorry, bro. But if you want to put it in the chat, maybe we can answer it on the way out. Okay, what's up, Trudy?
Hi, guys. It's nice to finally actually meet you guys. I've been part of your Heart of Dating group for like 2 years now.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I
Oh.
say that, Kate, what you were saying about like just the struggles with like sexuality, pornography, and things like that, and how it's like a lack of emotional connection, that brought me to tears. I will say
Mm.
it brought me to tears because I'm kind of in that transition where I'm like, you know breaking old habits, breaking soul ties, and breaking all those things. And the one thing that I can see mostly in my life is lack of emotional connection. Like, I find that I'm very
Mm.
like standoffish emotionally. And I
Mm.
don't know if it stems from childhood, because in my childhood, there was no consistency.
Mm.
Just to give a back history, I grew up in a loving Christian home, very conservative Christian home, I might add. I was surprised to hear about the purity thing because I had only heard about it. I didn't know the details of it. I thank God that they didn't bring that into our church, because I
Mhm.
think that would have driven me nuts. But um, the one inconsistency that I had growing up was, like, for the first 14 years of my life, I was at home, in the hospital, in rehabilitation,
Mm.
because of the disability that I was unfortunately born with, or
Mm.
fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it. And so I just want to say that it just resonated with me, what you
Mm.
were saying about that and emotional connections. And I really appreciate you bringing that out,
Yeah.
about emotional connections. I do actually have a question, though. I'm trying to remember because my brain's a little fuzzy right now. But the one question that I had was, when it comes to extending grace to an individual who does have a sexual past, right?
Mhm.
What would you say would be a reasonable time period, um, between when a person has had, if they had a sexual past? Like, it's hard to formulate this question, but I think you get my drift, though.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
Yes, I think I'm getting what you're saying. I think, I think the biggest question we need to ask when we talk to somebody and we find out that they have an extensive past is to find out, like, and first of all, get curious. Like, we want to lead not with judgment, but with getting curious. What happened in their life and where are they today? I think that's the biggest thing, is who are they becoming? One of my favorite quotes of all time is John Mark Comer. Who are you becoming by the things you're doing? And so I'm less interested in what your past was, and I'm more interested in who are you becoming today and who have you been becoming since your sexual past. And I'm also interested in what is your sexual ethic today. And so you might have the most extensive sexual past. In fact, we have a really awesome friend, Josh Broom, who is a former porn star. You guys may have heard of him. And so you may come across someone maybe who is a Christian whose life has been radically transformed, and maybe they came out of prostitution or they were a porn star, right? And the question is, and that's very dramatic, but that could be like, that is the most dramatic you can get almost. But the question is not, hey, what was your past? It's more, okay, that was your past. Who are you today and who are you becoming? And also, like, I would say to more specifics of your question, Trudy, like, if they were like, hey, I was in a relationship 2 months ago, it ended, and I did have sex with that person, I would say, okay, like, I would get definitely ask more questions and get curious. And I would raise some red flags. We're in a series on red flags right now to say, okay, this has not been a consistent thing they've been able to stick with in terms of a new sexual ethic. So I want to get curious and see, like, are they a person of their word? Are they actively working towards a new sexual ethic? And what are they putting into place? Same question if you find out that somebody had a struggle with pornography. I would say, is it an active addiction? Are they actively looking at pornography? Or is this something that they struggled with a year ago or 6 months ago that they've actually separated themselves from? Okay, that's awesome. What are they doing to continue that practice of separating from themselves from those past tendencies? Do you have anything to add to
No,
that,
that was
Brian?
great. I think it was great. I think a lot of people kind of have that question silently in their head,
Yes.
but they never really have put a finger on it. So
There's no set process of like, oh, I have to know that you have not had sex for at least 1 year or
right.
5 years. Like, no,
You
it's all,
can't.
you can't do that. We can't label people as like, oh, you're too far gone. It's been too soon. The question is really, who are they today? What spiritual fruit did they have in their life? And what are they actively pursuing towards that sexual ethic?
Yeah. It's a great one to close on. And let me just close on this note. The reality is that whether you've had extensive sexual trauma and abuse, or you've had, pornography and masturbation challenges for years and years, I don't care how vivid, how hard, how deep. The reality is that this is amazing. Eternally, where it really matters, we will be fully redeemed. But there is a reality that on earth, we get a sample, a taste, a little tease of redemption on earth in our physical bodies on earth. So I've seen a lot of comments on sexual trauma, abuse, and the reality is that absolutely there is totally in God's grace and favor and blessing, there is redemption available for you at this moment on this life and this earth. Totally. So just because you've had sex, just because you have done things that you regret, just because things out of your control have happened to you, it does not mean that that amazing gift of sex is off the table or is ruined for life. Totally. And I'm not talking about, your virginity and your physical body is totally restored. Sometimes you hear like miracle stories of like physical renewal and redemption. It can be totally spiritual and, more importantly, emotional as well. So there's totally redemption, totally available on earth in your future marriages and future sex lives. It is not ruined. It is not spoiled. There is hope. There is hope. So we're going to go ahead and close on that note and pray us out real quick, if that sounds good to you guys. Yeah. Okay. Jesus, thank you that we get to taste hope and redemption on this earth, that there is nothing that we could ever do to separate us from the love of God, for it is much wider, much deeper, much more rich, much more deepening, much more strengthening, much more renewing than we could ever imagine. Yes, and thank you so much that we get a hint, that we get a taste of your blessing, that you did not withhold anything on the cross for us to experience the kingdom of God here on earth in the short time we have here. So we just pray for the breaking, the snapping, the release of sexual shame, of sexual trauma that has plagued us, that has pervaded us, that has weighed upon our shoulders. And we look at the cross and we say one thing: it was enough. It was enough. The price you paid was enough. I don't have to beat up myself anymore. I don't have to shame myself anymore. What you did on the cross, it was enough, and the price was paid. So we just release the trauma, the weight, the pain, the shame in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Kait and JJ from Heart of Dating, thank you so much. It's just been wonderful. Thank you so much for your honesty and your transparency and the heart of love that's just kind of pervaded it all. Thank you to everybody who's joined us today. Thank you for being brave and for sharing, everybody. Obviously, things we've talked about today can be really sensitive topics, so please talk to someone you love, you trust, if that's helpful for you. But just going away knowing there is great redemption and great hope, as JJ and Kait have said. Please leave feedback about the event in the top of the app or the bottom of the platform. If you're there, it all really helps us as we continue to build Table and to provide great events that really encourage you and bless you and meet you where you are. But please, just once again, go away from today with great hope, with great optimism. And please check out our YouTube channel. We have the last amazing podcast from the Table event that Kait and JJ did for us. I've shared the link in the chat. So please click on that, have a listen, share it with any friends that could find it helpful. Check out the other Heart of Dating material that Kait's posted, and also other SALT content on our channel in some of these specific areas you might be struggling with. But yeah, go well and be blessed, and we hope to see you at some more Table events soon. Kait and JJ, thank you very much.
Thank you guys.